All right. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining our session today called Understanding Your Grief Journey. And I am Jennifer Tillman. I am a life and transformational coach and about to be, well, I just got certified as a grief coach as well. Many of you might know me, or some of you may know me as a real estate agent. I am a real estate agent with Keller Williams for over 17 years. And I help many of my clients go through various transitions. And that's one of the reasons why I decided to add grief coaching to my tool set of coaching, because many of my clients are caregivers, seniors, and adult children, and we need to also, everyone needs to be educated around grief, because grief is with us and it's going to be with us, and death is inevitable. So we also need to understand all of our grief journey. I hope that you agree with me. So today we're going to talk about grief, and we're also going to talk about 5 facts about grief. And I am going to move forward. Okay, so let's start by asking, what is grief? And let me just mention, I know sometimes as we're going through presentations, you might have questions. I will have a time period where I will answer questions and also possibly ask you questions. And if you're comfortable in participating, that would be great. So what is grief? Grief is the emotional and physical and cognitive response to losing someone or something that's very important to us. And what comes with grief, or with that loss, and that's change, because when we lose someone or something, life changes for us. It might not change for everyone else around us, but it definitely will change maybe a relationship. It will change a location where we're living. It's just going to change our life, and sometimes change is not easy. And when we talk about grieving, many times we're thinking about, we only grieve for people that we've lost, but people will grieve dogs, pets that they've lost, if they've lost a job, if they're becoming an empty nester, relationships, it could be a divorce. So there's many things that cause us to grieve in our world today. And so now I want to share with you the different types of grief. We have different types. There's even more types of grief, but I've picked out these. We have anticipatory grief. And this grief might be when you know that something is about to happen to your loved one. Maybe they are in the hospital and they're in hospice care. Maybe they have dementia. And so you're no longer, they're not gone yet, they're not died, they haven't died, but you've lost something there because maybe they don't recognize you anymore. So you have this anticipatory grief, which, it's something, it's coming, it's inevitable, but it's just not here yet. And you have some anxiety around it. Your life is going to change. You don't know what might happen. So that's anticipatory grief. And then we have complicated grief, which that's usually when you have a traumatic loss. It could be a violent death. It could be a death of a child, someone who's very young. Sometimes it's easier for us to understand or even accept when a person has lived a very long life. They lived a good life. But when we lose people that are young, unexpected, through violence, those are usually more complicated, and sometimes the grieving is extensive, and it takes a longer time, but so it's more complicated. There's more layers that we would have to deal with. And then we have what we call delayed grief. And with delayed grief, and some of these you can have together. Delayed grief might also be when you have to grieve, you want to grieve a person, but there's so many things that have to happen before you get to it almost. It could be that you're dealing with some major events And then, after all of that, you can then relax and grieve. I think about delayed grief when my mom died because I had to take care of a funeral here in the Maryland area and a funeral in the New Orleans area. And by the time I got back home after the funerals, I was here at my house by myself, and I just happened to see my mom's shoe. She lived with me prior to her death, and I just bawled. So that was like a delayed response to grief. I was already grieving, but it was a delayed response. So sometimes we don't grieve until everything is done. Everyone else is going back to their normal life, and now your grieving will start. We have mass grief. And this is something, sometimes you notice this in children because maybe a child has lost a loved one. And sometimes we say, oh, children bounce back, they get back. Sometimes they're better than the adults. But sometimes a person's behavior, they might be starting to work, have some negative behaviors, act out, at school or wherever. And sometimes we don't realize it's because they're masking that grief. Maybe they don't even know how to handle it. Many of adults, we don't know how to handle grief. And so mass grief might be when that young person is acting out. It could be that I had a friend who lost her daughter violently, and after a while, she said she was good, she was fine. But I heard just recently that she's in recovery from drinking. So sometimes when you mask that grief, you don't deal with the grief. It starts to show up in unhealthy ways throughout our lives. So we want to make sure that we do um, deal with the grief. And that's why we're having this presentation. So you learn how to face that grief and to work through the grief. Ambiguous grief is one that might be lacking closure. So with this one, you might see this when you're working or through a divorce. There's some unanswered, there's some things that are unanswered, some resolutions that have not been worked out, or there's closure that you have not gained yet. It could be that a person is estranged from their parents. So this is what they call this ambiguous grief. Disenfranchised grief is when it's not recognized or acknowledged by others outside of you. So this might be when you lose a pet. Your friends might be like, well, it was just a pet. You can always get another pet. You can always get another dog. So they don't understand how it has affected you. And they're wondering why you're grieving over a pet. It could be a person who's lost a child through pregnancy. So they're grieving, but the world around them is just going into their normal. And again, someone might feel, well, you can always have another child. So it's different, disenfranchised grief. It's grief that you're carrying, but it's not really recognized or acknowledged from other people. And then we have collective grief. And with collective grief, this is what we felt when we were going through the pandemic, losing so many loved ones, so many lives in such a short period of time. The entire country was just going through a grief because we were losing so many people. So this is from like national disasters. It could be a public figure. When we lose a public figure, the whole, world or the whole country might be, or even community might be grieving collectively on that. And so now I'll go through the 5 facts around grief. And the first one, as you see, is the reason that we grieve is because we've loved someone. That's the real reason that we grieve. It says, I have a quote, and I don't know who it was from. It says, death leaves a heartache no one can heal, but love leaves a sweet memory that no one can steal. And I really like this quote because it's so true. The heartache might be with you forever. When you think about a loved one that's lost, a parent, a spouse, a child, or even a pet, you know, that heartache is with you, and sometimes you feel like you won't ever heal from it. However, when you think about the loving memories of the person, the times that you share together, those memories are things that will always be with you, and no one can take that away from you. So losing someone you loved could be wildly painful. This is I've taken from this author. I really love working and reading her. She has a book called Conscious Grieving, and her name is Claire Bidwell Smith. And she says, loving someone you've loved is wildly painful. Losing someone that you've loved is wildly painful. And she goes on to say, we want that pain to go away. We want the person back. We want our world to just stand still. We want to be held. We want to be left alone sometimes. We are scared. We are wounded animals lashing out at anyone or anything that might approach us. That's how we might feel initially when we lose that loved one. And we worry that we will never be the same again. And, in most cases, we won't be the same again, but we will be better because of that loss if we learn how to grieve and face our grief so that we can learn and we can appreciate and we can have gratitude for the life that we did have with our loved one. So sometimes grief shows us what matters most in the world. And I don't know about you, but I'm going to ask, after the pandemic or even going through the pandemic, did you experience, life differently? Because I know for me, um, I started looking at life differently. I would hear myself say, life is short. Life is short. We never know what's going to happen from one day to the next. And especially when I started hearing about some people that I knew that I grew up with that were young, and you just all of a sudden heard that they died unexpectedly. Maybe it was a heart attack, or maybe it was a stroke, or it was something that was just not expected. And so I would hear myself say, life is short. And what I want to do is to live my life full. I want to spend more time with my loved ones. I want to make sure that I live in my purpose. That's the kind of thing I started saying to myself. And so that's what we mean when we say that sometimes grief teaches us some things about life and shows us, it helps us to understand who we really are. And we'll hear more about that. So I'm not sure if you had any feelings around, living through that pandemic that, or even in some of your own memories of your loved ones, what you may feel that you've learned from losing that. And definitely when I lost my parents, and then in the same year I lost my brother-in-law, I definitely felt that, it's almost like saying I'm going to start taking life seriously and live, live fully, live whole and stuff like that. One of the things that, you know, it's in our society. It's a bounce back society. So even with work, you don't get much time off and leave if you're working and you lose someone. So we're in a bounce back society, meaning that, you got to get right back into things. And we don't teach or learn anything about grieving and how that impacts our production, productivity, and all kinds of other things in our life. So the second fact that I want to talk to is that the emotions of grief are normal and natural. I was just speaking to a friend today, and she felt that when she first lost her spouse, um, that she wasn't supposed to be feeling angry and just frustrated and really angry with God. I have two friends who felt that initially they were just angry, and I know they're spiritual people, but they just could not grapple, the grieving that they were going through. So Claire also says it's okay to fall apart, you know, and she says the truth is that falling apart is how we actually come back together. And I know it might be hard for us to fall apart. You know, we might feel like we have to stay in control over what we're doing and how we're looking to others. So we might be masking the grief because we don't want anyone to see us fall apart, especially in public. You know, when I came home and started bawling, no one was around me. And so I was able to just do whatever I needed to do. But, you know, it doesn't matter where you are. If you have to fall apart, you have to do that because you have to work through that grief. And falling apart could be different for different people. It could be that you just burst out into tears. It could be that you want to stay in your room and you want to stay in bed and you don't want to do anything. So while we're telling ourselves that we, you know, can't afford to not function as usual and do the things that we normally do to bounce back, you know, like the society wants to say, sometimes grief requires that we depart from that normal activity, the normal or the usual way of our being. And sometimes the work of grief may require us to even shift our priorities. I remember after I lost my mom, my boss, my broker, actually said, you know, Jennifer, for the next several months, don't make any big decisions. Don't, you know, just be, you know. And then I was there to remind her when she lost her mom to just take it easy and just, you know, take some time to grieve. But, you know, it might take that mean that we might need to cry or we might need to rest. So don't feel bad about falling apart, you know, excuse me, the concept of falling apart. Sometimes we just have to be real with the feelings that we currently have. And you might be in the initial stages of losing someone, or it could be that you've lost someone years ago. I know I lost my mom in 2017 and my dad in 2021. But I still feel, you know, that I'm grieving them. I'm grieving the loss of them. And so if you've lost someone, maybe it's years ago, you might be here today because you still are going through some pain and it's still hard for you. And of course, if you've just lost someone in the last couple of months, you know, you're desperate to find a way out of the pain. And so I'm glad that you're here today for that. So letting yourself fall apart means surrendering to the emotions of grief and giving yourself the release that your body and soul really need and allowing the space and time to process and to reflect. So I want you to do a little experiment. I want you to just tighten up your fists, just ball up your fists as tight as you can get it until it almost hurts, you know. So just ball up those fists and tight, tight, tight until it's just almost hurting you. Your knuckles might be getting cold, white or whatever. This is what it feels like when you are resisting grief, when you're not, you know, wanting to go and feel and attempt to even look at your grief. However, now I want you to slowly open up your hands and let them relax and let your fingers curl like they want to curl and let go and just let your hands be. And this is the feeling of surrendering to that grief. It's letting go, it's unmasking, it's just being where you have to be and who you have to be and feeling whatever it is that's coming to you. And our next slide is showing you the different feelings that you might have when you're grieving. So some people, of course, might be in disbelief, you know, especially if you've heard something very unexpected, you know, a death of someone that was just so unexpected. You know, you might be in disbelief. You might be angry. You know, like I said, several people that I know told me that their first feelings were a feeling of anger. Um, you might be irritable, worried, scared. You may feel overwhelmed. And in some cases, I don't know if you guys see on the screen this word relief, you might even have some relief or you might be feeling relieved. And it could be because your loved one was suffering so much that now you feel that they're at peace, they're not suffering anymore. And so you're having some feelings of relief. It could be that you were in a bad relationship, and even though you're grieving, you also feel some relief behind that as well. So these are all different types of feelings that we might have as we are grieving. And it's okay to feel bitter. You know, maybe there was some unresolved issues. And so you're feeling a little bitter. You might be feeling bitter with God because, you know, He took your loved one. So there's lots of feelings that we go through. And it's okay. It's okay. And it's natural for us to feel these things and to go through these things. It's okay for us to have outbursts and for us to cry and for us to feel like we want to just be by ourselves, because all of this is how we're working through our grief. And so I want to now move into how, you know, that grief is unique, you know, to each one of us. So this is fact number 3. None of us are the same. And no one can say that they understand how another person is experiencing a loss. No one can expect that grieving will be the same for each of us. So grieving is very unique to the individual. And in families, sometimes one person might feel that a sibling is not grieving the loss. Maybe they're feeling like they didn't love the person because they're not grieving. However, you don't have, you know, it's not like, you know, maybe they're saying that this person is back to their work and they're busy and they're not grieving that loss. But you never know how that individual is going to grieve, and everyone's grieving is unique. That same person who might be back to work and doing things may be masking their grief. And so that's why education is so important for us to understand how we grieve and how we're different in grieving. Someone else might say that this person is just going overboard. You know, they're experiencing too many of these you know, they're putting on, they're not really grieving, they're just putting on maybe for attention or whatever. So we never know, but you have a lot of that going on within families, you know, because everyone is different. And if I ask you guys to tell me, what does happiness mean to you? And how do you feel when you're happy? We probably will all have a different response, because happiness might mean something to me, and something totally different to you. And when we're feeling happy, one person might want to do this and another person might see themselves doing something else. So bottom line, your grief is unique. And if you meet anyone, therapist or anyone who says you should be doing A, B, and C, or you shouldn't be grieving this, that, or the other, you have to remind them, or you have to just know for yourself that grieving is very unique. There's no right or wrong answer. There's no universal feeling that someone will have. One thing that you might wonder is, how long will this grieving last? You know, how long am I going to be grieving? And that really is going to be up to you as to how long. So the question might be, how long do I want to grieve? And that's going to bring us to our next point, which is, if you have a flat tire and you're sitting in your car, you have 2 options that you can take. You can sit in your car and not do anything and stay stuck, or you can get out and either look for help or change that flat tire so that you can start moving forward. So that's pretty much the same with grief. We have 2 choices. We have an obligation to live the rest of our lives for ourselves. And if we stay stuck and not get any support, not understand how to grieve, how to lean into this grief and move on with life, not saying that you're putting that loved one in the back burner, but you're working through and you're trying to understand how to use the experience to move forward, then you will just stay stuck and you might grieve in a bad way for a long time. So one of the things as a grief coach is to help you move through the grieving so that you do get to a better place and you get to a better person than you were prior to. And that's what we want to do. So we want to um, ask, what action steps am I willing to take to fix that flat tire so that I can move forward and not stay stuck? Which brings us to the fourth fact about grief. And the way out of grief is to move through it. So Claire also says, when we avoid grief, we walk in circles, always returning to the same place to find out that our grief is still waiting for us. When we walk forward, even move through the most painful parts of the experience, we allow ourselves the opportunity to make a way to a new place. And that place is on the other side of grief. Now, I'm not saying that you're not going to ever have grief or grief is going to go away. I think grief is always with us, but it's learning how to work through those painful parts of grief and move to a better place. And that better place might, when you get triggered or whatever, instead of falling out or doing something that's negative, you then begin to honor your loved one, live in their legacy, see yourself as they would want to see you moving forward. So there's a quote, and it's a long quote, and it might be a little blurry, so I'm going to read it to you from Elizabeth Ammons. And I love this quote as well. It says, "You can shed tears because they are gone, or you can smile because they lived. You can close your eyes and pray that they will come back, or you can open your eyes and see all that they left for you. Your heart can be empty because you can't see them, or you can be full of love you shared. You can turn your back on tomorrow or live yesterday, or you can be happy for tomorrow because of yesterday. You can remember only that they are gone, or you can cherish their memory and let it live on. You can cry and close your mind and feel empty, or you can do what they would want. Smile, open your heart, and love, and go on." So I like this, and if anyone wants it, I'll make sure that you get a copy of it. It's a beautiful memory or a beautiful quote, and it's something that you might put someplace so that whenever you are down, whenever you are triggered, you can come back to living in this mindset. And so now we move on to one of the last facts about grief, and that is grief will always teach us something about life if we allow it to. So I like to say that grief transforms us. And the reason I say this is because when we lose a loved one, we begin to see things differently. Like I mentioned, when we go through grief, we see the world differently. We begin to, I don't know if it's get more serious about our life, but when we lose a loved one, we begin to see life differently because things are different. Things have changed. We begin to examine what really matters, and grief strips us down to who the essence of us, who we really are, the essence of who we are. And we strive to become whole again. Again, thinking about the flat tire, if we decide to stay stuck, then we're not going to see these things. We're not going to see life differently. We're going to always feel like the victim. Something happened to us. Versus if we allow ourselves to move forward, really sit down and reflect on the grief, the things that we're feeling, and work through that, we can begin to strive our becoming a better person and seeing life differently. After losing my parents, my siblings and I would get together every December. So every year, Right after my dad passed, passed last. Every year in December we get together and we spend about 3 or 4 days, sometimes a whole week, and we're honoring the legacy of our parents. So we do fun things together. We just enjoy each other because again, we don't know what's going to happen the next day. We don't know where life is going to take us, and we want to make sure that we spend the time together. Like I said, living in the legacy that our parents gave us. Um, and as we spend this time, even with ourselves, if we take the time and really spend it with ourselves and get to know who we really are for ourselves, we begin to see that we are not who we were before the loss. We transform through grief when we learn new things about ourselves. So it could be that you're spending time by yourselves because you're focusing on things that matter in life. And there may be some things that you put aside years ago that you want to pick up again. You want to be able to get back into. Maybe because your life was so busy, you put some things aside. So spending this time, grieving that loss and learning more about who you are, you might be able to get back into some of the things that you used to do that you love doing, and getting back into those things. We may be more focused on what really matters now. We may even like the person that we are becoming, even though the path that got us to this place was not one that we asked for. So even though we're moving through that grief, we're transforming our life, we're getting to be the person that we really want to be, we're living in the legacy of our loved one, the path that took us there to where we are now is not what we were asking for, because we were not asking to lose a loved one. So our grief is not over and may never be. Through the support of others and our reflection on the gratitude that we might have in our hearts and the legacy of our loved one, we can get through those destructive coping methods when we get triggered, and release the negative and anxious thoughts, and use our newfound understanding of who we are and who we're becoming, and help us to get through and to continue moving through that grief. And like I said, we might really like the person that we're becoming more than who we were before. So now I'm going to take this moment and ask you, you have a little exercise to do right now. I want you to think about how your life has changed since losing your loved one, because I figure that each of you are here. Either you lost someone that was very close to you, or you know someone who lost someone that was close to them. But I'm sure in our lifetime, we've lost someone. So take a moment, think about how your life has changed since losing your loved one. What lesson did your loved one leave you or teach you? And how can you use that special legacy, that special lesson, and incorporate it in your own life? So I'm going to pause our recording right now. I'm going to give you about 2 minutes, 2 or 3 minutes, however long you want, to write out some things about how your life has changed since losing your loved one. What lessons did your loved one leave you with? And how will you begin to incorporate that lesson and that legacy in your own life? And maybe possibility you've already been doing this, and it would be great to hear from you. So I'm going to pause the recording. I'm going to give you a couple of minutes. I'll have you come back. If anyone wants to share, we won't have it recorded at that time. And then we will end our session today. I have one more thing to share with you after we come back. So right now I'm going to give you, let's see, it is 2:43. So I'll give you till around 2:45, 2:46, a couple of minutes. And I'll come back at that time. Resume. Okay. So I just want to leave you with a couple of things that I feel are important for us to remember and to do. Um, so I want to leave you with 5 things. Give yourself permission to grieve. Because as I mentioned, when we mask that grieving, it usually leads to negative behaviors, just unhealthy ways of living. And it keeps us with that flat tire. So give yourself permission to grieve and remember to honor the life and legacy of your loved one. Incorporate new traditions into the old traditions. So we may have had some old traditions that we did. And so now we have to think about new ways of living. As I mentioned, change is not always easy, but we want to think of new ways. And so incorporate some new traditions. Um, you might light candles, for your loved one when you have your dinner table set up for a holiday or their birthday or whatever, but just incorporate some new traditions that you might want to do um, and in honor of your loved one. Embrace meaning and purpose going forward. What matters most to you, going forward? And what's the purpose? What's the purpose in your life? And then lastly, finding gratitude in the gift of who you are now. Okay, so give yourself grace and find gratitude in the life that you shared with your loved one and also in the gift that you are now. And so here, this is who I am, Jennifer Tillman. My phone number is on the slide there. It's the first number is the 301-661-4472 and my email address. And I have a website for my coaching business, Be Inspired with CoachJen.com. And then the very last slide is my another slide that shows my phone number and everything. At this point, I'm going to, I don't know if Debbie, are you able to put that link in the chat? I'm going to just stop sharing. So we're going to put a link in the chat. Okay, yeah, it's there already. And this link is the feedback form. So if you click on the link, it will take you to a feedback form and then you can fill out the form. I would greatly appreciate just understanding a little bit more about what you got out of the presentation today. If there's anything that you were missing that you would have wanted to hear, it's going to really help me to continue to build on the presentation to make sure that I'm addressing the needs. And, of course, everybody has different needs, but I would love to hear the feedback that you have from the presentation today. So the feedback form is in the chat. If you just click on it, it will take you right to the Google form that you can fill the information out. And I will be able to send out the recording to everyone if you want to share it with someone. Again, it's how I'm giving back to the community because we need to really learn and understand, be educated around grief. We're all going to go through grief. It's inevitable. We're going to lose our loved ones. And so it'd be great to just learn how to work through grief so that we can be healthy. And so that's all that I have today. If anyone wants to share something else, but I do appreciate everyone coming today. And if you would fill in that form, I'll also send it via email in case you're not able to click on the form here. Just look to get a follow-up email from me and Debbie. And I look forward to seeing you maybe at another presentation at another time. Thank you and have a blessed day.